The Molten Colossus, as I like to call it, is arguably the best overall tank build in Destiny 2, and it's been used by many players to clear things like solo dungeons and other high-end content, maybe like Grandmaster Nightfalls, Day 1 raids, master raids, all that stuff. Sure, there are other builds that are really strong too, I know, but this build is not only strong, it's also incredibly easy to use. It works in almost any form of content, and it's actually the build that I am planning to use for my Day 1 raid attempt on September 1st. Really excited for that, it's going to be awesome. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into the build, starting with the subclass setup. We're obviously going to be rocking the Sunbreaker Titan here, and you can feel free to pick whatever super you want. Both supers are good, but since we have a lot of floating bosses, especially in dungeons, I find that Hammer of Soul is a better option instead of Burning Maul. Use whatever barricade and jump you prefer, doesn't really matter, but make sure to choose the throwing hammer as your melee since it is the centerpiece of this build. Throwing hammer is great because of its unlimited use, as long as you don't lose it, of course. Not only does it do a crazy amount of damage, but it also cures you every time you hit an enemy and pick it up. Again, you only have to hit an enemy, you don't need to kill them to get the cure. For your grenade, you can go with whatever you like, but if you're looking for the ultimate survivability, like me, I go with the healing grenade for this build. As for your aspects, go with Soul Invictus first. Getting solar ability kills, Hammer of Soul impacts, and defeating scorched targets will create sunspots for you, which are these fire tornado looking things that you see everywhere. Sunspots are insanely good. Standing inside a sunspot will apply restoration, improved ability regen, slower super drain, and will apply scorch to any enemy that dares enter them. You will be generating so many sunspots that it's going to be difficult to find an area on the map that does not contain a sunspot once you get the build loop going. Your second aspect should be Roaring Flames, which states that getting kills from solar ability kills or ignitions will increase the damage of those solar abilities, stacking up to 3 times. It's a 20-second buff that's refreshed every time you get a solar ability kill or ignition, so it's very easy to keep up almost all the time. To proc Roaring Flames, 99% of the time, we are going to be using the Throwing Hammer, so let's see what Roaring Flames does to it. Our baseline melee hit against this Acolyte here does 20,629 damage. Getting the kill, as you can see, will get us 1 stack of Roaring Flames, which then does 24,755 damage to the next Acolyte here, or around a 20% damage increase. 2 stacks of Roaring Flames does 29,706, or 44% increased damage. And finally, 3 stacks does 35,647 damage, or about 73% increased damage over our baseline. This alone is a huge damage increase, and remember, it applies to all of your solar damage abilities. So grenades, supers, those count as well. And don't worry, we're going to return back here and add even more damage, but first let's cover the fragments to see how they factor into the build. The fragments I like going with are Empyrean, Ashes, Mercy, and Searing. Empyrean will lengthen the amount of time that you have restoration and radiant effects. We don't really care about radiant too much, but the restoration is great. Ember of Ashes will apply more scorch to enemies, which is always nice. This basically means more free damage and more possible ignitions. Ember of Mercy is a very strong fragment that will give us 2 ways to get the restoration buff. 1 by reviving an ally, easy, and 2 by picking up a fire sprite. And we can generate fire sprites through our last fragment, which is Ember of Searing. All you have to do is get a scorch kill and a fire sprite spawns in. There is a cooldown here, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's not too long, it's like 7 seconds or something like that. You will get tons of scorch kills with your hammer, so fire sprites will be everywhere, which means tons of restoration or constant healing. If you're trying to solo a dungeon though, with a boss that moves around a lot, kind of like Ghosts of the Deep, go with Ember of Beams instead of Ashes, because that will help your Hammer of Soul track to the boss a little bit easier. Next, let's cover the exotic armor piece we'll be using, which is the Synthoceps exotic gauntlets. Thankfully, there is nothing complex about the Synthoceps with this build, very straightforward. The exotic perk Biotic Enhancements states that you get increased melee lunge range and improved melee and super damage when you're surrounded by enemies. This is a tank build, so you're going to be surrounded by enemies almost all the time. This means as long as you see that Biotic Enhancements showing up as an active buff, you will be getting the full advantage that Synthoceps provide you. So how much of a damage increase are we talking here? Well, at Roaring Flames ×3 with Biotic Enhancements active, a single hammer throw now does 82,370 damage. This is about a 300% damage increase from our baseline, so we're doing pretty good here. What's cool about Synthoceps and Roaring Flames is that it not only applies applies to your throwing hammer, but it also applies to your standard non-charged melee. Non-charged melees do about 50% of what your hammer does, so it's still a lot of damage once all these buffs get going. So sometimes you don't want to throw your hammer out into the abyss and lose it. Using your standard melee is sometimes the safer and better option. So use that when you want. Thankfully, as long as you have at least one Roaring Flame stack, non-charged melee kills will also refresh your Roaring Flames timer, so feel free to use that non-charged melee whenever you want. So max Roaring Flames and Synthoceps to do some crazy damage, that's awesome, but let's take it even further. Tractor Cannon is what you want to have equipped here, and it's going to be mostly the only weapon that you use in this build. When you hit an enemy with a tractor cannon, they receive a 30% weaken debuff, so our throwing hammers become even more deadly. Tractor Cannon is going to come in handy for enemies mainly like Majors, Hive Guardians, and bosses, especially when doing those difficult solo runs. So with the Roaring Flames ×3, biotic enhancements from the Synthoceps, and this weaken that we get from the Tractor Cannon, our throwing hammer now does 107,081 damage, or around 420% increased damage. You can see in my solo Ghost of the Deep run here, when damaging Ekthar, I was doing over 100,000 per hit, which is insane DPS, and it's also just so easy to do. So Tractor Cannon is great. As for your other weapons, it doesn't matter too much, but use any solar weapon that has incandescent on it because it synergizes so well with solar. There's a few solar trace rifles or shotguns, anything like that that you want to use. Callus Mini Tool works too. Now let's talk mods. The way I like to set it up for my helmet, firstly, is use double hands on, which will regenerate our super as we get melee kills, which, as we know, is all the time. You could go with 3 of these mods if you want, but feel free to use whatever third mod you want in that place. For the gloves, I like going with 1 impact induction to help regenerate the healing grenade with melee hits. 1 grenade kickstart is nice to get a small amount of grenade energy back each time we throw a grenade, and 1 heavy-handed to generate an orb on melee kills. A lot going on there just with the gauntlets. For your chest, go with 2 resist mods of whatever the activity calls for, and your third mod you can again kind of use whatever you like here. I like using concussive dampener. For the boots, go with double better already to keep that constant health regen when picking up orbs, and recuperation to get an instant chunk of HP also when picking up orbs. The class item doesn't really matter too much, but I use double bomber and a powerful attraction just because it's available and there really isn't anything better. Both of these mods will provide benefit when popping your barricade. Bomber is going to give you some grenade energy, and powerful attraction will collect nearby orbs for you. And as for your stats, nothing too surprising here. Just try to get 100 resilience and then get as high discipline as you can, high strength, just in case you lose your hammer. Nothing else really matters that much. All right, finally, let's put this build together and see how it works in action. I mentioned that the throwing hammer is definitely the centerpiece of this build, so here's everything that 1 throwing hammer will do for you. Getting a kill with throwing hammer will build your Roaring Flame stacks, it'll create a sunspot through Sol Invictus, spawn an orb through the heavy-handed mod, generate some super energy and grenade energy through the hands-on and impact induction mods, and obviously deal tons of damage to anything caught in your way. And remember, all of these sunspots that you'll be creating will be providing you with tons of benefits by just standing in them. Not to mention generating fire sprites through Ember of Searing, which, remember, fire sprites will provide you with a restoration buff for constant healing through Ember of Mercy. Any orbs you create will also provide even more healing through the Better Already and recuperation mods. Synthoceps obviously going to be doing tons of work for you by passively dramatically increasing your melee damage, and any enemy unlucky enough to get caught with a tractor cannon to the face will die so easily, it's just hilarious. The last thing I'll mention here is the healing grenade, which I haven't talked about too much in this video, but it does come in handy in those clutch moments where you just need healing and you have no other option. It's perfect for those moments that you have to stand still and activate something when you have a billion enemies shooting at you. The passive restoration that it provides you is extremely helpful and you're usually very safe. And that's about it here. This build is so easy to use. You can use it just about anywhere and it doesn't take really any thought to get going. You just kind of play and it works for you. It's great. So definitely go with this build if you're trying to go for that solo dungeon clear that you've been putting off for months. Go get it. You can do it. Or if you just want to dominate some content. Well, all right, everyone, that is it for this one. I will see you all in the Discord. Make sure to join or in the next video. See ya.